Hey, Faith family and friends. Welcome back for another episode of our Faithful Friday vlog as we continue seeking Jesus through the Old Testament. And on this episode, I want to show you a few ways that the book of Ruth points us to the person and work of Jesus Christ. Now, Ruth is an interesting book because it follows the life of Ruth. I know, duh. But Ruth isn't a judge. She doesn't become royalty or become incredibly influential in the welfare of God's people or anything that we typically would consider notable for biblical history. But the history of her life points us to some amazing realities of how God would ultimately work in Jesus Christ, while also making a way for Ruth to be forever connected to Jesus. If you read Ruth, it starts off by explaining how Ruth is the daughter-in-law of a woman named Naomi. And Naomi was the wife of a Judean from Bethlehem named Elimelech. But Elimelech dies suddenly, and we don't exactly know why, but Naomi was left with her two sons and their wives. Now, her two sons eventually married Moabite women. Now, we have to understand that for people of Judah, this wasn't something you were supposed to do, according to Deuteronomy chapter 23, verses 3 through 4, which says, "No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord," that's the Lord's people, "even to the 10th generation. None of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse you." So, for the original readers among the Israelites, this is already getting off to a bad start, if you will. Ruth, as a Moabite woman, was not part of God's people or considered that way. But I suppose if she gets married into the Jewish people, perhaps that's at least something to consider. But then, 10 years later, both Naomi's sons die. And so all that's left is Naomi and her two daughters-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Now, one of the things we need to understand that's very different than our current context is that for Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, there was no assistance or welfare to address their practical needs. And in ancient Israelite society, a woman really had no way to make an honest living on her own. So, when given the chance, Orpah just bails to try and find a new husband back in Moab, her home country. But Ruth decides to stay with Naomi and actually makes a vow to her that's recorded in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16, which says, "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." Now again, remember, Ruth being a Moabite woman, especially without an Israelite husband, meant that she couldn't be considered part of God's people or Israel. And yet she chooses to live her life in loyalty to Naomi, her people, and her God, the Lord, capital L-O-R-D, which in the original Hebrew is Yahweh. Now, the rest of the story, in summary, is that Naomi leads Ruth to go and be introduced to a relative of her husband named Boaz. Now, through a series of events, Boaz and Ruth take a liking to each other. And however, there's something that stands in the way between them being able to be married. Now, because Naomi and Ruth were both widows with no next of kin in their immediate family, no sons to carry on their name, the estate of their husbands had to be bought by a kinsman redeemer. Now, this is a term meaning a person who would take legal responsibility on behalf of the family members to address their needs. Now, how everything went down regarding their needed redemption is recorded in Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there, and behold, the Redeemer, of whom Boaz had spoken, came by. So Boaz said, "Turn aside, friend, sit down here." And he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Then he said to the Redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling the parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. So I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of those sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me, that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you." And he said, "I will redeem it." Then Boaz said, "The day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance." Then the Redeemer said, "I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." So you see, Boaz couldn't just marry Ruth without redeeming Naomi and her estate. But first dib belonged to another relative of Naomi's, who remains nameless in this story. However, even though the prospect of acquiring more land seemed inviting at first, the idea that whoever redeems the land will have to carry on the family name of Elimelech and his sons in their place, it meant that redeeming Naomi and Ruth would come at a personal cost to the Redeemer. So the first candidate passes. But long story short, Boaz is willing to redeem Naomi's estate, absorb the cost to himself, marry Ruth, even though he would end up only perpetuating the family name of his relatives and not his own. Now, this is a picture of what we mean when we talk about how Jesus is our Redeemer, or that we have redemption through Jesus Christ. For us to be brought into the family of God, we had to be bought out of our desperate state at a great personal cost to our Redeemer. As Ephesians 1:17 describes, in him, Jesus, we have redemption through his blood. So instead of paying the cost of our redemption with money, like Boaz did, Jesus Christ absorbed the cost of our redemption with his blood, the sacrifice of his very life on the cross. But there's another interesting connection between Ruth and Jesus that ends up transpiring from this bit of history. We discover this once we get to the genealogy of Jesus recorded in Matthew chapter 1. We'll just look at the first 5 verses. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez, and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, who just turns out to be the father of David, which leads all the way eventually to Jesus himself. Now, did you catch that? One of only 5 women listed in the genealogy of Jesus, from Abraham to Jesus, is none other than Ruth. A Moabite woman, through redemption, is forever brought into the bloodline or family of Jesus Christ. Now, that is a reflection of the plan of God from the beginning to redeem all nations, Jew and Gentile, into the family of God by grace through faith in Jesus Christ. Pretty cool, huh? Now, that's all for now, but next week, as part of Holy Week, we will take some time to reflect on Mark's account of the day Jesus died on the cross for us in Mark chapter 15. So until then, take care and God bless.